Welcome to the Buzz Podcast. This is Guns and Ammo. I'm Editor-in-Chief Eric Poole, and I've got Handgunning Editor Jim Tarr with us. Today, we're going to focus on you, Jim. I mean, all about you. I like to do a little bit of these writer profiles, if you will, just so that readers can start to learn the person behind the face, behind the byline in the magazine. And you also work with Guns and Ammo TV and also TV for Scott Rupp, right? Scott Rupp being the editor of Handguns and Rifle Shooter.
I have in the past. I've guest. I've been a guest on Guns and Ammo TV since the 2009 season, and then I was the co-host of the Handguns TV show for its last season, and then they brought it. They sort of rebirthed it as the Handguns and Defensive Weapons TV show, and I co-hosted that for 5 seasons. So
yes, so you've been behind the camera quite a bit, and somehow I managed to loop you into this podcast when we started it, and you've been a really reliable contributor for that, and I appreciate it. But you're also the current handgunning editor, which goes back to the first one, 1958. Jeff Cooper came on board, and he sort of made a name for himself in the pages of Guns and Ammo. You know, he had a lot of personality to him. And Jim, that's what I love about you, is you bring a lot of personality. And despite our criticism and heckling of your Hawaiian shirts, you continue to wear them in spite of it.
Well, those who can do, and those who can't wear loud shirts to distract you from that fact. So,
right.
This is, everybody talks about in the CCW realm, going gray man while they're wearing 511 clothes or whatever. I'm a middle-aged white guy in a Hawaiian shirt. I disappear in the room. Nobody even sees me. It's like you talk about. This is about as gray man as you get, and the random different color patterns do a very good job of concealing bulges.
Yeah, well, that's a great idea for people out there who love to carry full-size guns, correct?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a great way to hide those patterns, those large pistol grips.
Yep, you got it.
And you pretty much don't care what anyone thinks of you, so we can move on with life.
I will accept criticism, but I've got to the point in my life where having a lot of miles under the tires, shall we say, that a lot of criticism just doesn't bother me, and I don't care what certain people think about certain things, and they can move on and I can move on, and that's just the way it goes. I'm not a delicate flower. A little criticism doesn't seem to bother me anymore.
Well, it's funny. I get a lot of people who will say, "Hey, you're the editor of Guns and Ammo magazine." I'm saying a lot of people, I mean one or two. And they ask, is Jim Tarr really snarky? Is he that person that I read about? And I say, honestly, when I edit his articles, I try very hard never to remove your voice, because you are this way. And I love that little bit of attitude and character. And some people say, well, why would you have a guy like that writing it, be your handgunning editor? And I said, well, one, besides the fact he's very qualified and he's a great shooter, can adapt to many handguns, he gets readers writing letters in. And I tell you, you are usually responsible for about 20% of the mail that I still receive through the U.S. Postal Service every month. So thank you for that, Jim.
Well, okay, there's a reason for that. One, I am full of personality. I have an excess of personality, as I've been told, but boring lives create boring people, and I have had anything but a boring life, fortunately or otherwise. But two, I remember when I first started getting into this, writing very part-time, I think I was reading an issue of Combat Handguns, formerly Harris Publications.
Right.
And I read the entire issue cover to cover, and I couldn't tell you who wrote what article, because they all blended together. There wasn't much there. And so when I decided to try and make this a living, I wanted to put some of my personality into the articles. I wanted people who, when they read one of my articles, to either go, oh, I can tell this is Tarr, this sounds just like Tarr, or them to go, who the heck wrote this? And then go look and find my name. One way or the other, I wanted to make an impression. And it's tough because we're writing nonfiction. So a lot of times we're just doing reviews of products, but you have to figure out a way. I have a big love of writing fiction. And so I think part of my success is approaching each article like you're telling a story. You have to have an introduction that is interesting or entertaining or in some other way grabs the reader. And then you've got the center of it, the body of it, where you talk about whatever you need to talk about. And then you've got the conclusion where you wrap everything up. But you can do that very dry and from a technical standpoint. And a lot of guys that came into this from the technical aspect, one way or the other, they tend to be a little dry, a little formulaic. Whereas I started my writing career is I've always wrote fiction. I loved writing fiction. I wrote fiction for myself. And then around 99 or 2000, I think it was, I was a very avid competitor, USPSA IPSC competitor. And one of the guys that I shot with locally wrote an article that got published in the USPSA member magazine front site. And I'm like, I can do that. I can do that. I mean, I wrote my first novel in 1989. It was a complete full novel. It didn't get published forever.
Yeah.
But
What was it?
Failure Drill. It was eventually published in 2004. It's a little rough, but you know, the way you get better at something is by continuing to do it. But I was like, I could do that. So I started writing articles part-time, very part-time, for first the USPSA member magazine, and then I tried breaking into the national publications, the NRA publications, Harris Publications, and our parent group, with not that much success.
Right.
And then one of the guys that I shot with locally was the former handgun editor of Guns and Ammo, Pat Sweeney, who could see, one, that I could shoot, and two, that I could write. And so he got me in with our group, and the rest, as they say, is history. So,
well, that's right. You know, what I love about some of your writing is, as your fiction has developed, it is carried over into your article writing. And by the time you came to replace Jeremy Stafford, of course, now works over at Mossberg, but he was the previous handgunning editor. And then before Jeremy Stafford, it was Patrick Sweeney. You were a very refined person. You'd already published, 5 or 6 fiction books at that point, and you had a pretty good handle of how to introduce your personality into the writing, much better than you probably would have had you become the handgunning editor in the mid 2000s.
Yeah, well, you always think you're good at something until you look back a few years later and look back, and then you're like, ooh, that's not as good as I thought it was.
Right.
I've got I'm old enough now. I've got a lot of experience. I'm not any smarter than I was. My brain has never worked better than when I was in junior high school, and I was in I took a theater class, and for my final, I memorized Edgar Allan Poe's The Cask of Amontillado and performed that.
Nice.
And that, I think, is like, I don't even know, like 1,000 words, or it's like 17 pages. It's something ridiculous. And I memorized it. I couldn't do that now, but I didn't know anything. I was, in junior high, I didn't know anything. And
right.
now, 40 years later, almost 40 years later, my brain isn't necessarily working as well, but I got so much more experience that the end result is I'm hopefully, I think, smarter, and can bring all of those years and all that experience doing all sorts of different things in my career, to the page, because as you say, as I've said, you don't go anywhere to become a gun writer. There's no degree in gun writing. It's the people that are on their own interested in a bunch of various things, and then they end up sidestepping one way or the other into writing for gun magazines. And as a result, the people that do this are just have such interesting backgrounds, such fascinating backgrounds. And I've been a cop, I've been a private investigator, I'm an accomplished competitive shooter. I've got all sorts of crazy personal stories, and I'm boring and unaccomplished compared to so many of the people that I work with.
Well, let me bring
it.
you back to reality for a second here, because I had a college professor once, and he really he was teaching on creative writing, and he said, "Hey, those who write encyclopedias," it shows you how old I am. Those who write encyclopedias aspire to be novelists. Those who write novelists aspire to write short stories, as Edgar Allan Poe did for a newspaper. Those who write short stories aspire to be poets. We should all aspire to be poets. And I tell you what, after just finishing Cascade.
Oh, did you finish that?
We still have some work to do before you're a poet, Jim. I wouldn't get all thinking that you've accomplished everything you need to in life. So let's get some poetry in these articles for Guns and Ammo.
That was originally that's the first in my zombie trilogy, my not zombie trilogy. It's a weaponized virus, and that was originally when I first started writing. It was supposed to be one book, and it ended up being 3. And that first book, that's longer than 6 of the 7 Harry Potter novels. That is. And that was just the first place where I could cut it. But people are like, hey, at least you get your money's worth out of the book, because you see how thick it is.
Let me ask you, okay, so Bistari was the first book I read. Even I received a copy of Failure Drill, but I'm pretty sure it wound up on my shelf up here, and I just never got around to it. But Bistari was the one that I actually sat down and read. You've got dinosaurs in there. You've written about zombies. In terms of a real world scenario. What I always loved about the way you wrote, even if I couldn't necessarily buy into some of your underlying theories, was your accuracy in describing the firearms that appeared throughout, and you really expressed some of your gun writerness, if it's a condition, in those books. And I've always appreciated that, because not a lot of writers get to that level of detail or believability in terms of their knowledge and understanding of how things work. They just throw in some popular firearm or term that they've heard reused on a television show, for example. You don't do that, because you are a user. And I find if you're a gun person and you want to read a fun, interesting book, you got to check out those books by Jim Tarr, because as he's progressed in his skills have improved, so have these stories. And I appreciate where you're getting to. I haven't gotten Dog Soldiers yet, so if you happen to have a copy of that around, let me know.
Well, I believe I've got one around here, and I try to, when I write, maybe because all the time I've spent writing articles and reviewing products, is I try to make everything not just entertaining but technically accurate, and that's fascinating and fun, especially when you're writing a fiction novel, because I've got a lot of them set in real places. Like, so for Bestiary, I did all sorts of research on Mexico, because most of it's set in the wilds of Mexico, and I've been to Mexico a number of times, but still doing the research is always interesting. And then for Cascade, all of the details I put in there about everything, but especially like weaponized viruses and stuff like that, that's all technically accurate. Even the same thing about Bestiary, where it's set in the near future, and there are genetically engineered creatures that at least physically resemble dinosaurs. Everything in there is technically accurate as far as paleontologists know it to be true these days, including a lot of the dinosaurs actually having feathers, which is what they're more and more discovering that more and more of them, because they're the ancestors of modern birds. So most of them have feathers, and people are like, well, they didn't put that in any of the Jurassic movies because,
I missed that.
giant feathers, giant feathered birds aren't as scary as like giant killer lizards. But,
Right.
and so
Yeah,
the struggle is to make an entertaining story that's also technically accurate. That's where the big struggle is.
So where do these seeds of inspiration come from? Like, why these genetically similar to dinosaurs beasts, and why these zombies? What in you is preventing you from just writing a good old-fashioned Italian crime novel?
Okay, well, I've got 15 books out now. One's a nonfiction autobiography that I wrote for somebody else that was put out for HarperCollins, Carnivore. And so of the 14 ones left, 10 of them are straight thrillers. Failure Drills is the first, but I've got, using my background working in law enforcement and as off and on for about 20 years as a private investigator in and around the Detroit area.
Mm-hmm.
That was very colorful. And so that was the background for the thrillers that I've got, the John Falt thrillers, which started with Failure Drill, and then the Dave Anderson thrillers, which started with Whorl, WHORL. And Whorl is one, Bestiary is one, and same with Cascade. Okay, so Whorl, WHORL, that's a kind of fingerprint. And I've spent time in law enforcement, and they say that no two people actually have the same fingerprints. There's absolutely no way to verify that. And I got thinking about that, and then thinking about all of the high profile crimes where they've 100% identified someone who was the culprit based on fingerprint evidence, and then later it turns out they were wrong. Well, you're like, how could it be wrong? It's because there's human input at every step of the way where there's room for error. And even if you use the computer, using the AFIS system or whatever to bring up possible matches, you still have to actually have a human that does the matching. Are these two fingerprints the same? And so that got me thinking, what if, for the plot of Whorl, was what if there are actually two people who have the exact same fingerprint? If that came out, then anyone who was ever convicted of a crime where fingerprint evidence was ever even admitted into evidence in trial would immediately call for a mistrial and a retrial, and it would throw the entire U.S. justice system into turmoil, because you're talking hundreds of thousands of people that would want that. And so, of course, what if the government found out about it ahead of time and then decided to kill the people that discovered that and hide up the evidence, and insert the government conspiracy thriller part of the story. When it came to Bestiary, I love the Jurassic Park novels from Michael Crichton, but the movies were all ridiculous. They had all of the dinosaurs acting like homicidal human serial killers, which is just ridiculous. And so I wanted to write a novel where you had genetically engineered animals who were maybe originally created for a theme park or whatever, but who acted like actual animals in the wild. And so I'm like, okay, what kind of scenario could I build around that to make it interesting? And so it's set maybe 40 years in the future in a Civil War torn Mexico, where you've got private contractors, and some of these animals had been released into the wild and they've been breeding for a couple of decades. And so you've got people that are running into and interacting with all of these animals in the wilds, and that I have the animals acting like actual animals would in the wild, in addition to having to deal with cartel soldiers and communist guerrillas and stuff like that, all the stuff that makes for fun action thriller novels. And then the Cascade which is the first of my zombie trilogy. I love zombies. We've put out a zombie SIP. Zombies were huge. They're not really necessarily as huge now as they were, but they were huge at one point. And I love the zombie genre. However, if you're a fan of the zombie genre, there's stories right when the zombie outbreak happens, and then there's the stories that take place after the zombies have taken over everything, but you never have anything in between. And the reason is, if you look at the math doesn't work out. There's never going to be enough reanimated corpses or whatever to take over the world, especially considering every other person in this country has a gun. So if you want to have any sort of an outbreak that has legs, it has to be some sort of a weaponized virus that healthy people can spread. And then so I had a weaponized virus that was actually introduced by Middle Eastern terrorists into the U.S. by infecting some of their own people and just having them fly in on commercial flights, including one of them to Atlanta, Hartsfield Jackson International Airport, which is maybe still the busiest airport in the world. I mean, imagine if you got somebody infectious just walking around there, and how soon would that spread whatever disease around the country and the world. So we've got that weaponized virus that produces zombie-like effects in the afflicted. And then also I started working on that right about the same time that we all went through the whole COVID experience, which there's a lot of not family friendly words that I want to use to describe that. But if you look at everything that governments did during COVID, especially maybe even taking advantage of the situation, or a virus that wasn't necessarily as serious as they said it was, imagine if there actually was a weaponized virus introduced that was amazingly deadly, and what would the government reaction be to that? So I throw all of that into the hopper, and you've got a little bit of everything, including societal downfall, and then you've got to have it's a thriller. It's an action story. You got to have a bunch of people with guns. So the main group was a group of people that were out in Vegas competing at a big tactical match, and then they get stranded there, and they got to make it home. But luckily, they've got all their guns with them. It's a happy accident.
Pretty convenient. Well, I tell you what, don't give away the ending to these books. To read more, you've got to go out and get them. And I tell you what, if you're in Hollywood right now and you're a producer looking for some fresh and original screenplays, you should probably pick up some of these books. But James, before we move back on into the gun topics, where can people find some of your novels?
Well, everything's available through Amazon. If Cascade is probably the easiest title, that like bestiary. Everybody's like, how do you even spell bestiary? Because it's got two eyes on the end. And that's one of those, just in case people are wondering, bestiary with two eyes on the end. Those were the gladiators who specialized in fighting wild animals. So, and which I stumbled across that term and the existence of those people while I was writing the story, and I thought it was really interesting, but maybe it was a mistake because nobody knows how to spell the damn title of the book. So, but anyway, yes. Yeah, so
where do they find the books?
Everything's available on Amazon. Just search in Amazon in my name, and either Failure Drill, Cascade, Dog Soldiers, all one word, which is a modern Civil War novel that takes place 10 years into the conflict. And that actually, I've self-published books. I've had publishers put out books. I wrote that nonfiction book for HarperCollins, which is one of the largest publishers in the world. And Dog Soldiers, honestly, is the highest selling book I've ever put out, and that was self-published in part because, it's a story of a modern Civil War and government out of control or whatever. And I happened to put it out basically the first month of the COVID lockdowns.
Good timing.
So it was great timing. And in addition to that, there is nothing that sells copies more than probably Tom Clancy basically invented the techno thriller. And then if there's a firearm version of the techno thriller, it's whatever Stephen Hunter. Stephen Hunter is considered the king of the firearms heavy techno thriller. And he's
reviewed a few of your books for you.
Yeah, and he's actually a friend of a friend. He's friends with Mark Keefe with the NRA, which we both know. And Mark put me in contact with Stephen, and we sat down and had a great time. And he gave me a very nice blurb for dog soldiers. And Stephen Hunter, if the name's not quite familiar for you, he wrote Point of Impact, which was turned into the movie Shooter with Mark Wahlberg, that was then made into a TV series as well. Yeah. He's a great guy. And so his name is gold. If you love firearm technical accuracy in a book, him saying that the book is good will sell copies.
So for some aspiring novelists, do you suggest self-publishing is the way to go for this next generation of publishing? Or what advice do you have for people who are interested in writing novels or nonfiction, what have you?
Well, that's an hour-long conversation, honestly, because
let's sum it up in about 1 minute.
1 minute. Well, in the same way that the cable news networks seem to have abandoned half of their potential audience because they just don't seem to care about them, the major publishing houses and bookstores seem to have done the same thing. If you walk into any Barnes and Noble now and look at all of the new release fiction, 80% of it is written by women for women, and trying to find thrillers and mysteries and whatever written by men that would also be of interest to men is very difficult. And trying to
men just quit writing books?
Oh no, they have not. They're either going to smaller publishing houses or they're going to self-publishing. And like I know a number of authors that, you know, you'll have never seen their stuff in a Barnes and Noble, but because they literally can't get a publisher or an agent to be interested in their stuff, but they're millionaires because of their success self-publishing. Like Larry Correia, who's now been picked up by Baen Books. He wrote Monster Hunter International, which, if you're a big fan of gun heavy stuff that's technically accurate, Monster Hunter International and everything he's written since then, he self-published that originally, and it did so well it got picked up by a publisher. Now the same thing happened with me last year. I got picked up by Vinci Books. A lot of my self-published stuff got picked up by Vinci Books out of London because it was doing so well. But I couldn't get a publisher or an agent interested in my stuff to save my life. Now, okay, we'll bring it in-house. Keith Wood, who I know you've interviewed for this, Keith Wood worked with Jack Carr on his first 3 or 4 books. He was the co-writer of the first 3 or 4 books. Keith Wood put me in contact with Jack Carr's actual agent. But because I'm not a former Navy SEAL who's personal friends with Brad Thor, even though a lot of people tell me my stuff is better written and more realistic, the publishing world...
Let's not offend Brad.
Yeah. Not as Brad, but George, who's Jack Carr. That they're not really interested in me because the publishing houses these days, if you're writing if I was a middle-aged woman writing about sexy vampires, I'd be a multimillionaire by now. But because I write thrillers that tend to go for a more conservative male audience, they're a lot of times they're just not interested. So I've self-published, but I've seen a lot of success that way, and other people have as well. Like if you have Apple TV, there's a new series. There's a series called Silo, and they're based on books written by Hugh Howey. Hugh Howey originally wrote some stories and posted them in a blog online, and people are like, oh my God, this is great. And so he self-published the first novel, and a publisher saw it and said, this is so good, we're going to give you $100,000. You need to write some more for us. And as a result, now he's got a series on Apple TV that is every bit as good as the books that it's based on. And that was, people are like, well, I've never heard of any self-published authors. Yes, you are. It's just they've seen so much success that they ended up getting the attention of Hollywood or publishing.
And actually, it's these streaming services, right? I'm starting to notice a lot more streaming services who are looking for content, looking to produce film differently, are looking to these books. So perhaps you've got a chance still, Jim. Now, I'm going to transition to guns before we keep going on here, because that's probably what a lot of people are listening to. And I'm interested in your gun history, if you will. Let's go back to the beginning there.
Well, I've always been interested in guns and shooting, even before I was old enough to actually buy guns. I was a subscriber to Guns and Ammo, I think, when I was still in high school. Guns and Ammo, Soldier Fortune, all the other stuff. You mentioned Jeremy Stafford and Mossberg. The first gun I ever bought was a Mossberg riot gun, a 500, a pump action 12 gauge.
Sure.
And when I turned 18, I started buying guns, started shooting, really enjoyed it. Always wanted to get into competition shooting because I was reading American Handgunner, because they were always covering all of the IPSC and the USPSA competitions. And I didn't start shooting competition until I was 25, actually. And by that time I was an avid recreational shooter. I'd already been through the police academy. I was already working as a police officer. But I hadn't actually shot any competition. And then I started shooting USPSA and was really interested in that. But I always approached it from not a gaming aspect, but I always carried a gun. And so for competition, I always carried what I shot and shot what I carried. Which was a bit unusual, and it was deliberately handicapping me. And for the first 15 years, more than 15 years, that was in 1911, single stack 45, actually. Even back when later on, when a single stack gun in any caliber was a handicap because everybody was moving to wide bodies, but that was what I carried, so that was what I shot. And then I made it shooting a single stack 45 out of a Kramer horsehide belt holster, which was again handicapping me, but that was a real world carry holster. I made master class in limited division. And then I eventually transitioned to shooting production division, production division was brand new, and it was designed for non-1911 guns that were more suited to carry, duty type guns. And I started shooting production division with Glock 34, which is what I carried. A bit of a longer barrel
long on the slide,
but it wasn't any heavier than a Glock 17 because it had the cutout in the slide. So and it was significantly lighter than an all steel 1911. Compared to an all steel 1911, it felt like not carrying a gun because it was so light. And I always carried outside the waistband anyway. So I was already dressing to cover the gun. So the fact that the slide was a little bit longer, I'm either wearing a sweatshirt in the winter or Hawaiian shirts in the summer. And so it covered the muzzle anyway. And so I really liked production division. It a little bit more than limited division. It suited my shooting style. And I ended up making Grand Master in production division in about 2009 or 2010, something like that.
How many years had you been shooting before you made Grand Master? And can you give me an estimate about what your annual investment in the number of rounds you were practicing with before you reached that level? Like, was there a wall that you had to break through in practice before you reached it, or did it just happen naturally due to experience?
It's interesting because a lot of the guys shot a lot of rounds. The most I think I ever shot every year was 30 or 35,000, and that was unusual. 95% of my practice was dry fire. It was dry fire at home. Dry fire is free, and you don't need to drive anywhere to do it. And
the David Wester approach.
Yeah, well, actually, and I remember reading in the pages of Guns and Ammo when Ross Seafried, who was a IPSC world champion, he was the handgunning editor, and he talked about how when he would practice his draw. He would practice dry fire. He would do it at like 3/4 speed, but he wouldn't be satisfied unless it wouldn't stop until he had done like 10 perfect draws. And he was so picky that it was almost impossible to do a perfect draw. And so it would take him half an hour to complete 10 perfect draws. And so that's how I did so much of my practice. Now, I made masterclass in limited after about 8 or 9 years of competing, but it took me after I switched to production division, I saw some success. I became a very good masterclass shooter, but I decided that I wanted to become a grandmaster. And when I started seriously diving into that, it was half an hour to an hour of dry fire practice every day, plus during the warm weather months, which in Michigan is April to November-ish. We had enough active clubs in my area that I was able to shoot a match pretty much every weekend. And so I got good enough that I've won a number of state championships. I've won the Michigan the state championship is called the sectional. I've won the Michigan sectional. I've won the Indiana sectional. I've won the Area 5, which is the Midwestern. I've won the Midwestern production division title. And I had a really good time doing that, but it really took the diving in and practicing every single day for months and months and months and months, dry fire in addition to live fire, before I got to the level of grandmaster. And you really have to want it. You can't, it just doesn't happen by accident. It's interesting with USPSA, they've changed the classifications to a certain extent, but what I found was that people that are good and like shooting, a lot of them can get up to B class level. But to get beyond B class, it requires a certain level of practice and dedication. What I saw is that there were very few A class shooters, because for the amount of work that it took to get to A class, the people that were willing to put in that work weren't satisfied with A class, and they all made it to master at least. And so I remember the same month that I started shooting IPSC, September of '93, that shows how old I am. I started pin shooting at a local league. The Second Chance Pin Shoot was famous, and that was bowling pins on a metal table and timer, and the timer stopped when the gun came off the rail, and it stopped when the last pin went off the table. And it wasn't just speed, but it was accuracy, because there is no margin for error when you are shooting bowling pins at 25 feet. And so IPSC shooting, USPSA shooting taught me speed. The bowling pin shooting taught me accuracy, and added all together, it was it helped me get very good. But I had a lot of fun, and it also, because I was always doing it with my carry gun, I think it helped me I guess be a more well-rounded shooter.
Did your experience becoming a grandmaster then, do you think it would be more challenging or less challenging by today's rules and standards?
They've recently come out with a whole bunch of new classifiers, and I don't know if the new classifiers will make it easier or harder to make the grade. I don't know enough about them yet. I do know that back when production division was new, they were very, very restrictive as to what mods you could do on your gun, weights, trigger pulls, sights, stuff like that. And most of those rules have basically been thrown out the window, so that you can have a lot of fun and be very competitive at local levels. But if you want to win, not just your class, but overall at a regional level, at an area level, or at a national level, unfortunately, you can't really do that with any gun these days that's suitable for concealed carry, because the guns that they're using like the all steel SIG 320s or CZ75 clones or stuff like that, they're well in excess of 40 ounces, and nobody's carrying those guns in the real world. I was running a Glock 34, which empty was 24 ounces, which is absolutely nothing. And so when these guys are basically running a gun that weighs twice that much, so there's no recoil. So it'd be like shooting against guys that are running 22 caliber conversion kits. They're not having any recoil to deal with, which I get that, but for all of the
let me interrupt you a second. So you have, since COVID especially, a lot of new shooters have entered the market. Some of them just bought their first guns. We have a new category of guns basically started around 2015. Now, not to say that there weren't this category in production before, but with the popularity of pistols such as the 6-hour P365 series, the Springfield Armory Hellcat series, you could look around and find an equivalent. You've even got the Taurus GX4 type pistol. These are the first guns for a whole new generation of out there. If someone only had that to start with, it was a gun that they were carrying every day, what sport would you steer them towards to get involved in their community?
Everything's got its faults. I still to this day would recommend either USPSA or IDPA. You can learn things no matter what gun you're using, and you can find around the country what they call bug gun matches, backup gun matches that are suited to snub nose revolvers or SIG 365s, Hellcats, whatever, where everyone's running close to the same equipment. No matter, the advantage of competition shooting is everyone thinks they're good until you start competing.
Yeah, until you start competing. The timer.
And everyone thinks they're good until that timer goes off and your mind completely goes blank and you completely forget your plan of attack. And I've always described as action pistol shooting as high-speed problem solving with a gun. And it's stress inoculation. And one of the reasons, you brought me on in the past to the Guns and Ammo TV show when they had the pros versus Joes segments. Yeah. And they brought me on as a pro. And in part, I was never a national champion, but when you've learned how to perform on demand under stress, especially like if you're shooting, the great thing about this sport is we can like compete next to Tiger Woods. I've shot alongside Rob Latham, Todd Jarrett, Jerry Barnhart, all these guys. And there's cameras everywhere. And those cameras also happen to be looking at you, even if you happen to be a nobody. When you've learned to go off the buzzer, shoot your plan your shooting, and then shoot your plan and do it on demand under stress, everything after that seems much easier. And for all the people that are like saying that competition isn't realistic, competition is in the street, you can deliberately handicap yourself with your gear or whatever. I shot a match with my adult son this past weekend, and I always shoot my carry gun and my carry gear, but he was running his carry gun from an inside the waistband holster, just because he wanted practice with his CCW gun. And it was deliberately handicapping himself, but he wasn't trying to win the match. He was there for practice. He was there to learn how to run the gun under stress when strangers are watching him and judging him, which most people don't experience that. And even if you go to some sort of a class or a tactical school or something like that, you're still generally most of the time just one guy on a line. There's nobody staring right at you. And when you're competing, you are it. When you are in the shooting box, you are it. You've got an RO, you've got everyone else staring at you. And once you can learn how to perform mediocre or better, however, once you learn how to perform under those conditions, you are so much better off when it comes to having the ability to properly defend yourself if you actually find yourself in a stressful real world defensive situation.
Right. All right. Well, let's turn into a little bit more rapid fire. I'm looking for short answers now with these questions. So let me get your thoughts and opinions.
Okay.
For self-defense in a pistol caliber round, do you like tipped bullets with the cavity filled, or a jacketed hollow point, or full metal jacket?
Modern hollow points are so good these days that the filled tipped cavities are no longer necessary like they used to be. Those rounds still work great, but any modern premium defensive round works great thanks to the FBI ammunition testing protocol. All the modern new hollow points these days are built to meet those demands, and so they are all fabulous as far as I'm concerned.
Right.
I've changed my carry ammo a number of times, and you name any type of high-end defensive jacketed hollow point from any manufacturer, I'd be happy to carry it because I know it'll work.
Right.
We've both seen the gel tests of all of these
Yes.
these bullets through drywall and auto glass and sheet metal, and they just run. And it's a great day to be alive because your ammo does what it's supposed to do, unlike how it was back in the 70s and 80s.
All right. You're walking out the door. Do you take to your vehicle a pistol on your hip, or, given the option, a pistol caliber carbine in a carry bag?
I always have it, unless I'm somewhere where there's been metal detectors, I have a pistol on me, usually on my hip. I'm wearing a gun right now.
Yeah.
And
you
then
have your pants on. That's what you do.
I have my pants on. I've got a knife, a flashlight, a gun, a handcuff key, a wallet, cash.
Yeah.
But
you make a meme out of every pocket dump picture.
Well, yeah, but the thing is, a lot of these guys, they really only do it for the meme, whereas it's like it's sort of a lifestyle. If you're going to carry a gun, you should carry a gun, and if you've always got it, you don't have to think about it. So I've always got a handgun on me. A lot of times, I also have an AR pistol in the vehicle. Michigan law is you can't, even if you've got a CPL, concealed pistol license, you cannot have a loaded rifle or a loaded shotgun in your car. But if it's an AR pistol, that's a pistol. So, and it's not a pistol caliber. If I have to go to an AR, it is it is a 5.56 gun. So
okay. Next question. We got to be a little quicker about this.
Sorry.
Home defense. You're in an apartment. You're 20 something. You've got marginal training. Maybe you've gone a match or two. What's your home defense gun?
Whether it's an apartment or a house, no matter your skill level, I think the best choice for just about anybody for home defense is a pistol caliber carbine. It is easier to aim than a pistol. It holds more rounds than a pistol. It's not nearly as loud as a rifle. It doesn't have the stupid recoil or low capacity of a shotgun. Whether you are 4'10" or 6'6", you can run a 9mm AR all day long. And depending on whether or not your state hates the Constitution or not, your magazines hold somewhere between 10 and 33 rounds. And with a PCC, you can just look down the darn top of it if you're too scared to even use the sights, and you'll be hitting what you're aiming at.
Next one. You're in Wyoming. Similar circumstance, except you're a little bit more of a rural environment.
See, I guess it depends on what you're expecting. If you think that you might have to deal with poachers or just bad guys, and you're not going to have law enforcement show up to your house, even if you call 911, and you're going to have 15 minutes where you've got to defend yourself and your family for 15 or 20 minutes until law enforcement shows up, then it's a full power rifle. I've had a lot of bad things happen to family members, and so my default home defense weapon is a full power rifle with.
And when you say full power, let's be a little bit more precise about it.
It's not a pistol caliber carbine. I've got my home defense weapon is a Geissele chambered in 5.56 with a 14.5-inch barrel with a pinned and welded brake. So it's the minimum short length for a rifle, and it's even topped. Okay, so it's topped with a 1-to-6 set at 1 power, but that means I can throw it to 6 if I need to take a shot all the way at the end of the block, which I can't ever imagine that happening. But because it's a 1-to-6, that means that I don't need batteries. It doesn't matter if the batteries died. The optic always works. And
all right, next one.
Okay.
I can talk forever. Keep going. I need to keep it tight. All right. So you live in a restricted state, say like California or what's coming with Colorado, 10-round magazine. What are you looking at right there in a restricted area? You want to be a law-abiding citizen. You're trying to do the right thing, but you're also trying to be wise about your self-awareness and personal defense situation.
Are you talking a carry gun or for home defense?
Let's just say home defense.
I still, even if you're only restricted to 10-round mags, a PCC is still a great overall choice. 10 rounds. 9mm, you'll get a little extra velocity, a little better performance out of a longer barrel, because if you're limited to 10-round mags, you might also be restricted from owning like an AR pistol or whatever, so you might have a longer barrel. So I still would go with the 10-round Glock or whatever mag in a PCC. I think that'll do 99% of everything that needs to be done.
Okay, little preference questions now. Leather, Kydex, or other?
For years and years and years, I carried I carried horsehide holsters and horsehide belt, because horsehide looks like leather but wears like plastic. For the past 10 years or so, maybe a little bit more, I've always carried what I shot at matches and shot what I carried. So I was running polymer or Kydex holsters. For the past 3 or 4 years, I've been running the Safariland 5198, which is an outside the waistband holster, and it's a thermoplastic. It's not Kydex. It's a different kind of polymer. And it's got suede on the inside, so it won't scrape up your gun. So it's
also a little quiet too.
It's quiet. It's tucked in a little tighter to your body, but you can draw really fast from it. So I think it's the best outside the waistband holster there is for concealed carry. That doesn't slow you down.
All right, no more than 3 words for the answers to the next questions. All right. If you've read Guns and Ammo magazine, you already know the answer to these, but light, no light on a handgun.
No light.
Optic, no optic, as in red dot or no red dot on a handgun. We know the answer here. He is an Iron Sight fan, fellas.
No, my dot is the big orange thing on my front sight. And I don't have to worry about batteries.
Outside the waistband, cross draw, off body or on body?
For me, it's outside the waistband.
Excellent. Okay. Last question. What would you tell your younger self?
Honestly, my younger self.
One sentence.
Keep going. It gets better.
Good one. That's really good. Really sharp. Well, Jim, thank you for taking the time to talk with me about it. I think we could have kept going for a long time, even just on writing books alone, but I appreciate the hour you've given me here, and it's been a lot of fun. Thank you for stewarding the Handgun Editor column in Guns and Ammo magazine. I hope you still find it fun and carry it further.
It is, and that the one that's coming out, I think, in the next issue, the musings from the bunker is sure to irritate and annoy and outrage a number of people. So expect to get more letters demanding my firing. So
no one's asked you to be fired, but no, thank you very much. You're doing a great job. Appreciate your time, and look for Jim Tarr to be hosting more podcasts to come.